I was invited recently to participate in a panel discussion about Western misconceptions about Islam. I was promptly disinvited because apparently I'm controversial. I did hesitate actually to accept the invitation in the first place because I told the host that I'm not strictly speaking a religious speaker. He had a number of da'is and comparative religion debaters who were going to be on the panel, and I figured they would be sufficient for their discussion. But anyway, I did accept the invitation, the momentary invitation, because frankly, I wanted to redirect the whole inquiry. Because, in my opinion, this whole proposition is misguided. I don't see any point in correcting Western misconceptions about Islam generally, when in fact their misconceptions about their own so called civilization are much more debilitating for them. I think that's much more serious. If you can correct these misconceptions, then I think Islam can pretty well speak for itself. And the whole idea of explaining Islam to these people while they are living in a state of abject confusion and abject ignorance about their own society, well, it just doesn't make sense to me. In fact, I think it just contributes to their delusions about the West, because it presupposes that they are in some sort of a position to judge another civilization, another belief system. We're supposed to explain to them in a way that will align with their completely inaccurate understanding of who they are and what kind of a society they live in and what kind of a so-called civilization they come from. Like, for example, we're supposed to convince them that Islam respects women's rights as if they respect women's rights. We're supposed to assure them that Islam does not oppose liberty as if their society does not oppose liberty. We're supposed to tell them that Islam is not violent when they are the most violent civilization that has ever plagued this earth. So it has always seemed to me that step one is getting Westerners to actually understand what the West is and what it isn't. I don't think you should ever take an approach to them that affirms their delusions in any way whatsoever. I mean, how are you gonna get someone to understand the truth about your civilization when they are completely immersed in falsehood about their own so-called civilization? Like, I'm supposed to convince you about the moral rectitude of Islam while you are the least moral so-called civilization in history? No. You need to know yourselves. You can talk to each other about women's rights, but you can't say anything about that to anyone in the global South. When you talk about respecting women, where it's like Diddy talking to his mother or something, talking to someone who doesn't know that man, who doesn't know what he does, who doesn't know how he behaves, and who just thinks the best of him. No, the global South knows what you did and they know what you do. You wouldn't get to know the BTK killer by talking to his wife and family or his co-workers or the people at his church. I mean, they tell you how wonderful and mild-mannered he is, how decent he is, how respectful he is. No, you need to talk to the people who he tortured. You need to talk to the victims who survived his attacks. That's how you'll know what kind of a man he is. If you want to know how much the West respects women and how much they believe in human rights and dignity and so on, then you need to talk to their victims and see if they agree with their propaganda. Did you believe in equality and women's rights when you were raping Congolese women in public? When you were committing mass rapes in Algeria as counterinsurgency tactics? Did you believe in women's freedom and equality when you locked women in Namibia in concentration camps and raped them en masse? Or when you basically decriminalized raping African women because you thought they weren't actually even human? When you raped Angolan women in refugee camps or forced Indonesian women into sexual slavery, or committed widespread and entirely routine and approved of sexual violence across Vietnam, across Cambodia, Laos, and so on, and in Burma. What was that? Feminism? And when you raped Filipinas en masse, writ large, where were your sophisticated values then? I know I'm not talking about ancient history. Yes, you did it in colonial times, and you've kept doing it ever since. You never stopped enslaving women, raping women, murdering women in the global south. You never stopped doing that. You were doing it in Iraq, you were doing it in Afghanistan, and in Haiti, and in Bosnia, and in Syria. Yes, in fact, when you all calculate your rape statistics, as bad as they are, the way you calculate them, you fail to include all of the rapes that you commit overseas. When you put together how many of your own women get raped and assaulted in your own country, you should actually add to that all of the women that you rape and assault in other countries. You know, you talk about immigrants coming to the West and being criminals, but you never sent anyone but criminals to the global South. All your Western Enlightenment colonizers, all your praise the Lord and pass the ammunition missionaries, all your God bless America soldiers, all your degenerate businessmen, your so-called best and brightest that you sent over to our countries, who came to our countries to civilize us and Christianize us, to save our women from oppression and misogyny and our backward ways and our backwards cultures. You only sent over rapists and torturers and murderers. That's who you sent over to civilize us. Why, I don't know how you can even have the gall to pretend that you ever cared about women's rights, when all that you ever showed us in terms of women's rights is that you think you have a right to our women. And that's not even mentioning the misery of the woman over there in the West. Why, you raised her from childhood to be an object, just a decoration to be enjoyed by all and sundry. You teach her to conform to the ever more degrading societal standards, to wear revealing clothing, to be a sex object, to be eye candy. And then you have the audacity to claim that you believe in women's rights and equality. I mean, even your female Olympic athletes, who are the best at what they do, you require them to dress like pole dancers in their competitions. And all you do is ogle them, look at them and gawk at them instead of appreciate their discipline and hard work and training and skills. You know, you created OnlyFans and taught your women that what you truly value is degeneracy. You know, she could go to school, she could get degrees, she could become a doctor, she could become a lawyer, should become an engineer or a CEO, but she'll never get rich faster than if she gets naked on camera and defiles herself for strangers. That's what your society rewards women for. You know, a stripper can make more money than an executive. You're teaching them what you want them to do, what you want them to be, because your whole system denotes value exclusively in terms of pay packages. So you are implanting in women's minds and imposing on women's psyches that this type of behavior is what makes them valuable in your society. You know, more than half of the women in your society, more than half, feel pressured into performing abnormal sexual acts that they're not comfortable with just because their partners have warped their brains on pornography. So now they expect their wives and their girlfriends to act like porn stars. Meanwhile, most of those porn stars are out of their minds on drugs and numb from childhood trauma. But you want normal women to act like that, and you're mad if they don't. 87% of college-age women report being compelled to do these types of abnormal things sexually that they don't want to do because of your great feminist society. Girls as young as 13 say that they feel pressured to try to look and behave just like women in pornographic videos. 13. And because you dismiss the necessity of marriage, promiscuity has become normalized in your culture, making women feel compelled to become sexually intimate much earlier than they're comfortable doing. And they're made to feel like something's wrong with them if they don't do it. And then you gaslight them into thinking that this is freedom. You gaslight them into thinking that this is women's liberation. You're psychologically abusing the women in your society on every level. 69% of girls in the 5th to 12th grades report that magazine pictures influence their idea of what they're supposed to look like. 45% of women report feeling pressure to try to achieve a certain body shape or a certain size. And 1 in 5 women report that because of this, they experience body dysmorphic disorder, wherein they think that there's something wrong with how they look. They think there's something wrong with how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made them. If they don't look like a supermodel in some magazine or look like a porn star in some video. You know, you claim to believe in women's equality, but the data shows that women in your society are still objectified and still marginalized. 60% of women report feeling pressure to try to dress in a way that is socially considered to be attractive or sexually attractive by societal standards, which just means showing men more of their bodies, exposing more of themselves to men. 45% of women report feeling that they need to show more skin and show more skin that they're even comfortable showing in order to be considered attractive in your society. Look at what you're doing to women. The media perpetuates this culture of objectification, with women being depicted in revealing clothing in 70% of advertisements. Now, women are exposed, on average, to 5,000 advertisements per day. And 70% of those advertisements feature women in revealing clothing, meaning you are constantly messaging to women that they have to be as undressed as possible if they want to be socially acceptable. That's your society. So, of course, your women are suffering. They're suffering from psychological consequences. The psychological consequences of these types of pressures, this type of gaslighting and manipulation. At least 1 in 5 women report experiencing anxiety or depression due to the pressure that they feel to wear revealing clothing that they don't want to wear. And they're obviously more likely to develop dissatisfaction and low self-esteem about themselves and how they look. And you pressure them into looking and acting like porn stars. Pressure them to have sex before they're ready, and pressure them to do things in the bedroom that they don't want to do. Not to mention the real physiological detrimental repercussions and the ramifications and the consequences of promiscuity on a woman, mentally and emotionally and physically. That's why your women are the most depressed, the most neurotic, the most medicated, why they have the most anxiety, the most stress, the most mental and psychological illnesses, because they live in the most woman-hating society in the world. And you still have the nerve to expect us to assure you that we care about women. Everything about your civilization declares your utter contempt for women. I'm telling you, you don't know who you are. You don't know what you are. You don't know what kind of a society you live in. You live in a world of lies. Forget about trying to correct your misconceptions about Islam. You have nothing but misconceptions about your own so-called civilization. It's not a civilization, it's a hallucination. And it's absolutely comical, the extent of your lack of self-awareness about your own culture, about your own society. You know, when I lived in the Middle East, I had Americans back home worried for my safety because they thought that every place in the Arab world was non-stop bombs going off, violence and bloodshed all the time. Meanwhile, you've had over 650 mass shootings in America just last year. Not to mention the fact that most of the bombs going off in the Middle East are American bombs being dropped from American warplanes. Whatever violence we have in the Muslim world, you brought to the Muslim world. America's #1 export is violence. As a matter of fact, it's one of the only things that you still manufacture over there. It's one of the only things you still excel at, better than anyone else. Is Islam a religion of peace? You must be joking. You've dropped 500,000 bombs on us in just the last 25 years and killed over 1 million Muslims in just the last 25 years. That's not even including the current genocide in Gaza that you're committing. Again, this is like the BTK killer wanting someone to assure him that they don't subscribe to violence. What are you even talking about? Your whole society, your whole so-called civilization is violently extremist, more than anyone else has ever been. You love to threaten your enemies with bombing them back to the Stone Age without it ever registering in your mind that this is a Stone Age mentality. The only difference between you and a caveman is that you have gadgets, but you're the land of the free, right? Islam is so strict, it's so rigid, you know. Muslims don't have any freedom. Meanwhile, America has more laws and more regulations than any country on earth. You have more laws and more regulations than Saudi Arabia, more than Afghanistan, more than any Muslim country. You can't even remodel your kitchen in America if you're a homeowner, which you probably aren't. But if you are a homeowner and you have a kitchen and you want to remodel your kitchen, you can't even do that without a permit. You have to get a permit to remodel your own kitchen. Your government decides what food you can eat, what food you're allowed to eat, what food is legal for you to eat. Meanwhile, they allow genetically modified foods, fake foods, foods with all sorts of additives and chemicals and what have you. And a farmer, who grows food on his own land, he's not even allowed to sell food to you right from his land, right from his farm, right out of his crops, fresh, without FDA approval. He even needs government approval to give you an apple from a tree. Your government even decides how hot your shower is allowed to be. It's absurd. But of course, you'll defend all of those laws. You'll defend all of those laws because you'll say they're there to protect you. Okay, if you say so. But you don't have a choice, do you? You don't have the freedom to not follow those rules, do you? We have a comparatively minuscule set of laws, most of which are self-imposed. With no external monitoring, no external enforcement, we follow them by our own conscience. But what you mean by how strict and how rigid we are, what you're talking about is basically all the sins and the debauchery that your government does allow. So that's actually the freedom that you're talking about. You're talking about the freedom to be uncivilized, the freedom to be primitive, the freedom to be hedonistic. And that's what makes you, in your mind, more civilized than us. The freedom to be uncivilized. You think that makes you more civilized. And somehow that makes sense to you. I'm telling you, your society, your so-called civilization is playing you for a fool. They're even fooling you about your own prosperity. I mean, take the United States, the richest country in the world, right? But just look at different states in America. Take a state inside of America, any of the 50 states, and look at it as if it was a country. Look at its GDP, look at its standard of living, look at its quality of life, look at its infrastructure, and so on. Say if you took Mississippi, if Mississippi was a country, or Idaho, or Montana, or New Mexico, or Kentucky, if those states, those American states, if those were countries, well, they'd be equivalent economies. Economically, they'd be equivalent to an Argentina, or to a Colombia, or to Thailand. They would be low to middle income countries. Those American states, they would be low to middle income countries. That's the reality of your life. Most Americans live in conditions, they live in economies within their state that are exactly the same as countries that you would regard as third world countries, as developing countries. That's how you're living in real life. I mean, unless you're among the so-called coastal elites, your state is basically a third world country. And even in those coastal elite states, you know perfectly well that there are cities and neighborhoods inside of those elite states, those rich states. There are cities and neighborhoods that are just as poor as any poor city in the global south. But they've got you thinking that you're better off than people in the developing world. They've got you thinking that you're better off than people in the global south. Why, if most of the states in America were countries, they'd probably be trying to join BRICS. And the same goes for the UK. If you're not living in London, if you're in, say, the north of England, it's the same. It's a third world. You're in the third world. If you're in the north of England, you're in the third world. You're in a developing country. You are deeply and comprehensively misled about your societies, and you still expect Muslims to answer you about anything? You're standing there butt naked in a cowboy hat, telling us that our suit is out of fashion. No, there's no point in trying to make you understand us when you don't even remotely understand yourselves. The whole world has been indulging you, has been indulging the West, and what they want to believe about themselves. We've been indulging you for far too long. It's time for you to start justifying yourself to us. We're not going to pretend that you're in any sort of a position to demand us to justify ourselves to you, when the reality is that no one is, and no one has ever been, as violent, as oppressive, as misogynistic, as restrictive, and as opposed to liberty and to human dignity as Western so-called civilization.